Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. I did actually end up being able to move because the people who had the U-Haul and were walking around in front of my apartment window were finally gone. So here I am, yay, able to film, good lighting, all that stuff. Today I wanted to do a kinky opinions video. I realize I haven't done one in a while, and this one is inspired by Brittany Simon's video. She did a video about BDSM being normal and making BDSM too normal, and I kind of want to follow up on that video. And it's not necessarily a response video because I don't disagree with her in any way. Like, girl did a good job. Go watch that video. Links in the description. But I kind of want to give my own form of interpretation of BDSM becoming normalized and if BDSM is too normal now. I think the introduction of BDSM into mainstream culture is sort of a double-edged sword. The good side is that BDSM is something people can openly talk about. It's something I think eventually we will be able to no longer fear losing our jobs, losing our families, losing our spouses, losing our significant others over having these various kinks or wanting to be involved in BDSM. I think it's good to have an open dialogue, because having an open dialogue about BDSM also means we're going to have open dialogue about consent. We're going to have open dialogue about the differences between BDSM and abuse. We're going to have open dialogue about what makes BDSM good, why people enjoy BDSM, sexuality in general. I think all that stuff is really important to talk about, and I don't think we talk about it enough in vanilla world. So I think introducing BDSM is good for all of those reasons. However, what we have actually seen, what has actually occurred, is BDSM largely being trivialized, and this is my opinion. Keep in mind, this is an opinion-based video. BDSM being trivialized and used as like a sexy marketing ploy for a very desirable audience of people that marketers want to be able to attract. And so BDSM is basically being used for marketing and advertising and selling something, but we still have a lot of that fear around, you know, people could actually lose their jobs, they could lose their families, they could lose custody of their child because of the kink that they're involved in, no matter how safe it is, no matter how consensual it is, no matter the circumstances involved whatsoever. Even just going to a single BDSM party, if you are working for the government and if your employer found out that, you know, 2 years ago you went to a dungeon, like, you could be in serious jeopardy of losing your job. And the fact that BDSM is being presented in the vanilla world via books like 50 Shades of Grey, via the movies thereafter, all of the related novels, like, hasn't really changed that. And I think being able to open that door and being able to, you know, talk about BDSM a little bit, we only talked about it as a result of the videos and the result of the movies that we have seen involving BDSM. The only thing that has really substantially happened is why this is not all BDSM, why this is not abuse, but it hasn't really presented any sort of further discussion. It's just being like, BDSM is evil, sex before marriage is evil, blah, 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 versus BDSM can be safe, sane, and consensual. And that was sort of the extent of the discussion that really happened. And maybe it will depend on the person. Kind of just speaking from what I know and what I've experienced with my family, my friends, the people that I know. But maybe it did open people's eyes to BDSM, and maybe it did help some people who are really kinky be able to, you know, go out in public and go to dungeons for the first time. But I personally don't know anybody. And I have met a lot of people who are into BDSM. I've gone to lots of dungeons, I've gone to lots of parties, I've had so many people messaging me on FetLife, and nobody has gone up to me and told me I got involved with kink. And they got involved with an actual real-life BDSM community because of 50 Shades of Grey. And I don't want this to be a 50 Shades of Grey video, so I'm going to go ahead and move away from this sort of part of the discussion for now. But that is sort of, I think, what has happened as a result of BDSM being introduced in the way that it has to vanilla culture. I think another problem that we are currently having is BDSM is very much rooted in tradition, is very much rooted in specific social protocol and a specific way of conducting oneself in a very specific culture. And I mean that in every sense of the sociological definition of an alternative culture. So if you're looking at something like the goth community, if you're looking at something like the BDSM community, hell, if you're looking at something like the deaf community, there are rules, there are protocols, there are expectations, and ways of interacting that are very different from the social norm. And I think, like in Brittany Simon's video, and again, I totally agree with her, is rather than bringing up BDSM and saying, here's what we do, here's what you do, and holding them on equal grounds and accepting them both for what they are, what we're doing is, in order to make BDSM more palatable to the vanilla world, we are trying to make BDSM more like vanilla culture. And to me, that is just such a dumb idea. Like, why would we do that? We're in this alternative subculture for a reason, because the vanilla world is not suited to us, because we are strange and weird and different, and we want a place where we can be all these things without fear of judgment. And trying to make BDSM more vanilla that's not going to get us anywhere. And again, I'm not part of the lesbian community, gay community. Like, I'm asexual. I consider myself separate from LGBT in most ways. It is very similar to that. It's very similar to trying to make gay culture and lesbian culture more palatable to heterosexual society. I think there is a very strong correlation between the two. And I think gay culture and lesbian culture are supposed to be different from vanilla culture, or rather heterosexual culture, for a reason. They have different social norms. They have different ways of interacting. They have their own spaces, their own language in some cases, and by that I don't mean necessarily like their own entirely separate language, but they have a very specific way of communicating and finding each other that is different than in the heterosexual community. In a very similar way, BDSM has its own mores, it has its own norms, it has its own ways of handling things, and I think in a lot of ways they are better than in vanilla culture. I think there's so much more open communication, there's so much honesty, there's so much more focus on knowing your partner at this very intimate level and treating them well. And if you're a consent violator, if you are a sex offender, if you're accused of sexual abuse, if you are accused of in any way, shape, or form harming or being generally bad to another person, you will face serious reprimands in a BDSM context. Like, if you are somebody who is a known consent violator, 99.999% of the time, if that is a known fact to the dungeon that you want to go to, they will just kick you out. They will bar you from entry because they don't want to harbor people like that. Whereas in vanilla society, we have all of these cases with mountains of evidence where this person is clearly a serial sexual abuser, a serial rapist, somebody who repeatedly and consistently violates consent, and then we have discussions about, well, what if it ruins their college career? Oh, we feel so bad for them. But in BDSM, we don't give a fuck about that. We're like, we protect the victim, not you. And I am so proud of that, and it's something I never want to change about how BDSM operates. Something else that I find to be troublesome with this whole BDSM becoming more vanilla, trying to make BDSM more normalized, is something, and I'm beating a dead horse here, is Tumblr and Instagram. Any kind of vanilla social media, if it is not FetLife, it is not something that is geared for BDSM people, if kinky things happen on it, it is either diluted or controlled, or it is a very, very, very narrow subset of one thing. Like on my video that I made about DDLG versus pet play, and this is somewhat my fault for the way that I made the video, I had to talk about a very stereotypical form of DDLG. I had a very stereotypical idea of a little in my head because I'm not a little. I have a limited experience with other littles and what they do, and I had to kind of just pick one for the sake of argument, because if I tried to make a video talking about, every kind of potential little versus every kind of potential pet, it would be like a 3-hour long video, and I would never get through it, because for the sake of argument, you need to be able to make some assumptions, so that's why I went that way. But a lot of my stereotype, a lot of things that I've seen about DDLG, and a lot of, I think, younger people in BDSM, and I just had an idea for another tangent I'm going to go on once I'm done with this one, but we'll get there, is what Tumblr and Instagram attracts is a very specific subset of BDSM at large. Again, pet play, age play, DDLG, usually for people between ages of 18 and 25, somewhere in that general region. A lot of people have a very stereotypical image of what DDLG and pet play are supposed to look like and how it's supposed to be done based solely on what they're seeing on these two social media platforms, which is just wrong because it's a very specific, narrow subset. Like, holy shit, pet play in the gay community, and puppy play specifically, looks completely different than the way that it does on pink aesthetic Tumblr bullshit. Like, two completely different forms of pet play, and this is not too bad. People who have the whole pink aesthetic, like, Tumblr thing, totally fine if that is your jam. I just kind of find it hilarious how two things can still be pet play, but are so different, but we only talk about one, like it's the one that exists. Like, there's so much more out there than just what you see on Instagram and Tumblr, and I think it's become very narrowed and watered down in a way that is presentable and digestible to vanillas who may see it on those social media platforms. And so you aren't really able to get a true sense of what these kinks and these fetishes actually look like because you're so restricted by the platforms that you're being presented on. And people just assume that, like, eating out of a bowl is really extreme, and having a full-on latex mask gag pony play outfit is extreme. You don't want other people to see these freaky extremists because the only thing they've ever experienced, the only thing they ever know, is what they've seen on Tumblr and Instagram because it has become so watered down and so much more easily digestible for the younger and less experienced among us. And even people who have been into pet play for years and years and years are still, that's the only thing that they know. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if that's what you're into, but I sort of lament the lack of openness. And I think something that BDSM originally and BDSM as a whole in the real life community on places like FetLife, blah, 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 what they're really good at is the diversity of experiences. And I talked about this in my video about how I got introduced to kink, but like, just in the first play party I ever went to, I saw a type of little I've never seen anywhere on Instagram or Tumblr. I've seen people of different ages and different sizes I've never seen on Instagram or Tumblr. I've seen so many different ways of doing pet play and different dynamics and different ways of dress and different forms of communicating and expression that I've never seen on Tumblr and Instagram, and they're equally valid and they're equally important. And I think we shouldn't lose BDSM's openness in that regard. And I kind of want to be a little bit careful about that because BDSM does have its standards. It does, have its dress codes. It does have its ways of talking, its norms and its mores, like I said. But I think just openness to variety within your own kinks specifically is something that's really important about BDSM. I don't think we should go around telling people that the way that they do pet play is wrong or the way that they do DDLG is wrong because it doesn't meet that very specific narrow criteria of what pet play is supposed to look like based on those platforms. But yeah, that is basically what it is. And I think something that kind of goes along with this whole problem with 18, 25-year-olds only experiencing BDSM through already vanilla social media platforms is there's a huge age divide. Like, I think in order to really know BDSM and to really know what it's about and its history and how different it is from vanilla society and appreciate it for how different it is, you need to go to parties, you need to speak to older people, you need to speak to elders, I know we're all scared of talking to people in their 40s because we just assume the worst, but that's not the case. Like, there's nothing wrong with branching outside and reaching across, that age gap and talking to people who are outside, your little 25 to 18-year-old range. Like, they're going to miss out on so much information, and it makes me so sad because I know there's way more people than ever before involving themselves in kink, but there's that number isn't translating to young people actually going to BDSM events. And I say this with a grain of salt because TNG events are always the largest parties. Like, they are huge. They are always just jam-packed. But that younger set, that TNG set, a lot of them, they're only going to those events. They're not going to traditional leather events. They're not learning in the same way about submission and dominance, and part of that is, again, because it's become so normalized, in places like where I live. Like, it's, it can be hard to tell kinky people from vanilla people on the street anymore because so much of the fashion has become, I don't want to say compromised necessarily, but it's become so adopted by the mainstream. But It's the usual case of the majority group taking the elements of the minority group they like and then overshadowing the rest of that person's culture. It's happened time and time again all across the world, and it keeps happening, and now it's happening with BDSM. It sucks and it makes me angry, but that's, sort of where it's at. I think BDSM is definitely at risk. I don't necessarily think it's ever going to go away or be completely absorbed by our dominant vanilla culture. At least I would hope not, but I think there is a danger of trying to make it too palatable and make it too watered down to be absorbed by the masses at their current comfort level. I think rather than trying, there is some merit to meeting people where they are and starting that conversation about BDSM with vanilla people in a way that they can understand, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should shove in the closet all the things that make vanilla people uncomfortable, because those are still valid. Those are still parts of BDSM that we need, especially in a culture that doesn't value a lot of the same things that we do, that doesn't talk about consent, that doesn't talk about safety, that doesn't, all that stuff. Just that's kind of where I'm at, guys. Hopefully you found this video interesting. Leave any questions or comments you have down below, as well as any video suggestions or topics that you guys want me to talk about. I am always happy to hear from you all. I love, love, love comments. I personally think I have one of the best comment sections on all of YouTube. I don't want to brag, but y'all are awesome, and I love the comments that you leave. They make my day. I love reading them. They're great. If you want to find my social media as well as links to anything that I mentioned, please open up the description box. You will also find a link to my Patreon if you want to support this channel and see more. I would so appreciate it. I have tons of great perks for you guys if you're part of my Patreon family. And until I see you next time, have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.